I take it that means we're on. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick, and he's not Joe.
And I wasn't Joe last week. I wasn't Nick last week either. I think you're on mute there, Nick. So you might want to get unmuted because we can't hear a word you're saying.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you. That's perfect.
Okay, so let's start all over again. Welcome to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. I'm Nick. He's not Joseph. Joseph couldn't be here tonight. So I asked my good friend Chris to sub in for Joseph because he does such a great job when he does that. And he's with us for the first hour. And after that, we'll just have to see what happens. I have a feeling there's plenty of meat on the table, so we'll be able to continue the conversation after that. No show, Joe. Now, Murray, that wasn't nice. Actually, Chris and he have the same problem. They're running for municipal council here Chrissy, if you're a Hamilton Ticat fan, you're my favorite fan. Anyway, I just saw that. That was great. Anyway, so Joseph and Chris are both running for municipal council here in the city of Ottawa, and I wish them both the best. We have another regular listener that, what do you mean it isn't working? It is so working, isn't it?
I can hear you, but it sounds like you're in like a tunnel.
What the heck is going on? Let me check my
Connections and fittings, and I thought I had this all set up. Okay. This is okay. Good. Sounds like we got it now. So anyway, there's at least 3 people who contribute to the show. Craig is the other one. He's from down in Calabogie area. He's running for municipal council down there. So we wish him the best. And then Chris, of course, and Joseph are all running for council, which makes it interesting as a host with a co-host, because normally the co-host is supposed to be here, but I have to alternate sometimes because Chris has commitments to his campaign, and so does Joseph. So that's just the way it is. And it'll be that way for the next, 5 weeks now before the election?
Yeah, but 5 weeks.
Yep. You know,
it's coming up soon.
Producer, okay. I'd say get me one too, but that'd be a long walk. Anyway, I had something I was going to say. Unusual.
Something about the municipal election.
Here's a special invitation for a lot of the lurkers out there. There are people who listen to this show. Some of them don't even like it, but they listen anyway. And then they snipe at me from different social media, Facebook, Twitter, things like that. But they never have the courage to call the show and take me on face-to-face or voice-to-voice. So here's an invitation. If that's you, there's the number, 613-413-2217. Give me a call, and let's see, how you do when it's knuckle to knuckle. We'll see. Anyway, If they take me, I don't think they'll take. I have a couple people in mind. I doubt either one of them will take us up on it, but you never know. And if they do, bring it on, is all I can say. Now, I wanted to start, Chris, with your impressions because the big news in Canadian politics, and this is a Canadian show, so for our international listeners, if you're expat or something like that, or just care about what goes on in other democracies around the world, then it's relevant to listen to what I'm going to say next, or to this particular conversation Chris and I are going to have. The biggest story in Canadian politics recently, as far as meaningful stuff, we'll get to the trivial, oh my God, I can't believe he did this question here in a few minutes. But then I'm talking, of course, Justin Trudeau, the funeral of the Queen, things like that. We'll talk about all that in a minute. But first, I think the number one story in the country is Pierre Poilievre becoming the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party of Canada, CPC, and the impact he's had in the few days that he's been there. So I'm going to let you dive in here because I've been talking long enough, and I want to hear what you have to say about what you think his impact has been, and then we can banter back and forth about it.
Yeah, well, Joseph and I touched on that a bit last week, I believe, but it's still kind of fresh news. And we were talking about the how amazing it was actually that he captured 300 and some writings.
Yeah,
330
330.
writings. So he almost pretty well swept the country as far as the leadership is concerned. And I don't think anybody saw that. We thought that it might be a tighter race, especially with Jean Charest. And even though, Jean Charest has been out of federal politics for a few years, but I think he still has some popularity in Quebec. So I thought that his popularity in Quebec might make it a closer race, but I guess that wasn't the case. Maybe Jean just came in; it was too little, too late. But that was a bit of a surprise. I didn't think that Poilievre was going to win on the first ballot. But wow, what a resounding victory that was!
It was, and I think that there's everybody is looking at the United States, the midterm elections coming up down there, in this red wave. Now, remember, for the Canadian audience, red in the States does not mean the same thing as red in Canada. It's exactly 180 degrees out of phase.
Right.
The Conservatives in Canada are the blue party, or they fly the blue banner. And in the United States, it's the other way around. Red is the Conservative banner in the United States, and blue being the Democrats. Now, down in the States, the midterm is coming up in November.
Right.
Everybody's talking about a red wave. And I think I don't know what Biden's going to do, because everything he's touching is turning to mud. And the harder he tries, the worser it gets. And we can get into some of that as well. But I think we're going to have one here in Canada, too. It won't be a red wave. It'll be a blue one. Because, first of all, when the mainstream media is trying to downplay you, and I've been watching some of the news shows about his performance so far as prime minister, and say, well, he pulled the party together, but how much does that speak to Canadians in general? And this poll means this, and that poll means. I think it's all hogwash. I think that Craig is absolutely right. He just made a comment. The Liberals are so afraid of Pierre, they're eliminating the vax mandates and likely the arrive can requirements. We'll get to that shortly, but I think you're right. I think this is the kind of impact he's having, and it's refreshing to see, because I've always enjoyed his shoot from the hip point of view, or way of dealing with things. Like, he just won't take the garbage for an answer, right? Like, he'll get up in the House of Commons and say, okay, this program ran for this long. How much did it cost us? Or what did it cost us? A simple dollar figure, please. And they'll dance in circles and say, get up again. And he'll ask the same question and demand the same answer. And after it becomes obvious that they're not going to answer him, he'll just say, okay, well, we know it's probably cost a lot more than you're telling us, because he won't answer my question. So that's been, at least from my perspective, his impact on Canadian politics. And now that's elevated even more, that he is potentially the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, I still hear people saying that Pierre Poilievre is relatively unknown across the country. And I just don't know how that can be. I mean, he's been a star for the last, I'd say, almost 10 years. I mean, that guy's been outstanding. So I don't understand when journalists and broadcasters say, well, he swept the Conservative Party, but he's not really well known across the country. It's like, well, by people who just don't pay attention at all, I suppose he's not well known. But even if you pay the slightest attention to Canadian federal politics, you have to know a little bit about Pierre Poilievre and his brand. And his performance in the House of Commons is just incredible. He always has an answer. He's so quick on his feet that sometimes if you go on YouTube and you watch these little clips, and they'll have a clip of Pierre Poilievre in the House of Commons. Normally that would be boring stuff for most people, but then if it's Pierre Poilievre in question period, you're so tempted to say, I'm going to stop what I'm doing for a second and click on that link, because I want to see what he's going to do next, because it's always a gem. It never disappoints.
I think my favorite highlight moment for Pierre was when he challenged the prime minister to go outside the House of Commons, where this privilege they have does not exist. And he simply put his microphone down and walked out. I forget what the issue is, and I can't remember, why. It just was obvious he wasn't getting anywhere. And he said, look, if he's serious, he'll meet me out there and we can have a frank discussion right in front of the media. So he turned, got out of his seat and walked right down the middle of House of Commons and out the door. And of course, Mr. Courageous had no guts for that and would not, from his perspective, rising to the bait would have been, silly because he would have been eviscerated, but he didn't handle it well at all. So that's been a big difference for me. And I have enjoyed watching, because I knew Pierre, I've been following him since 2004 when he first got elected. I met him when he was a 24-year-old MP, the youngest ever elected to Canadian House of Commons. And we've run into each other at several different events. So I got to know him a little bit. We're not on each other's Christmas card list by any stretch. And as much as I'd like it, I doubt he's going to appoint me to the Senate. But if he wants to, if he hears this, I'll be glad to take a Senate seat. And I won't be a patsy, that's for sure.
Yeah. His instincts are pretty good, too. Thinking about the conservative leadership, and remember, I guess about a month ago, he decided that he and his team, they weren't going to participate in that last debate that was organized by the party. And some people thought, oh, that's a big mistake. You're not going to the debate. And it turned out to be the right decision because it ended up being like 3 candidates. And it was like 3 guys sitting around like a table. And it was as exciting as watching paint dry. And I'm thinking that was a smart decision, even though the party, I think he was fined $50,000 for not participating in the debate. It was a wise decision because they'd already had 2 or 3 debates. If you wanted to know his position on anything, there was already 3 opportunities. Why do you need like a 4th debate? It didn't make sense. But to me, I thought he was wise, and Leslyn Lewis too. They decided not to participate in that debate. Some people say, "Oh, you always have to go. You always have to go." Well, he made a decision, and it worked out. Oh, you've lost your audio there, Nick. I don't know what's happening now. Just keep. Nope, nothing yet.
There. Well, now.
There you go. We can hear you now.
My mic got muted accidentally. I fixed it. See, I know something about computers. I know how to unmute a microphone.
Oh wow, that's big this year.
For me, that's a lot. Oh man. But as far as Pierre is concerned, in a nutshell, he has shaken the tree. And there's a lot of nuts falling out of it. And you can see it in the mainstream media, and it's the same old story. If the media likes you as a conservative, that do they have turn on off? No, I don't think so. I think the Senate controls. Well, I don't know. Maybe they do. How would I know? I don't think I've ever set foot. I haven't set foot in the House of Commons either, for that matter.
I have.
But I've never been to the Senate. Yeah, it'd be a lot of fun to watch. Sit up in the top and throw banana peels at them or something, rotten tomatoes. That'd be a lot of fun, but they won't allow that either. Anyway, but to watch him develop as a person and to watch his campaign, if he runs a political campaign for a general election, the way he ran this one, he's going to win in a landslide. There were some of the best marketing, best videos I think I've ever seen as somebody who's been following politics for well over 20 years now, especially the one where he sat in his house talking about the beam, if you saw that one.
Yeah. No, some people didn't like that one. They thought it was a bit, I don't know, hokey or something, but it was okay. It wasn't one of the best ones, but it made a point.
You're never going to please everybody. And I thought it was earthy enough that the average person could connect with it. And that was the whole point. This is how you instead of counting on the media to get your message out, in today's world, a smart politician is on top of Twitter, Facebook, multimedia, every multimedia platform he can get his hands on, because that's where most people are. Even old farts like me, spend a lot of time paying attention to what's going on social media, because that's how the world gets its information now. Is that good or bad? Well, in the days when we had respectable reporters writing stories for newspapers who didn't editorialize, they just told us the story, maybe not so much. But in today's world, where that isn't the truth anymore, it might be the only source of information we have, that we can look at and make a decision on without, or at least understanding where the bias is. Because look, Pierre's going to do the best, or any politician is going to put out make himself or herself look as good as possible in these videos. And you know that when you watch them. So you take that bias. Go ahead.
You wouldn't see someone like it's not easy to do, because if it was that easy to do, then Jean Charest would have been out there doing YouTube videos all the time like Pierre. But that just wouldn't have come across as genuine, or it's not that Jean Charest is not a good speaker, but he couldn't do that type of thing and draw in thousands of clicks because he just doesn't have that charisma.
Well, let's face it. Most people understood that Jean Charest was a liberal in conservative clothing, that he really wasn't, he was only in it, from my estimation, to try to make sure that Pierre didn't win. Whether he won or not, he's obviously gone back to private life. So how committed was he to the cause in the first place? He could have said, okay, look, he won. Fair enough. We had an election. I didn't win, but I will support the team. He could have done that, but he chose not to. All right, well, a tiger by its stripes. So he went back to Never Never Land, and good for him. If that's what he wants to do, all right, fine. But there was never any doubt about his conservative roots. He was a windsock. He would change party wherever it suited him. That's why he went from conservative to liberal back to conservative again, and then in the private sector. So I never thought that Charest was a real threat. I was more worried about people like Leslyn Lewis than I was about Jean Charest, and I never really was worried about her. Nothing against her, just She was not the face of the party.
Yeah, I thought that when Jean Charest entered the race, I was a little bit concerned. I thought that he might sweep Quebec and maybe Eastern Canada. So I thought he was a threat just because of his name, but it turned out that his name didn't really carry the day at all.
I think those days are over, and hopefully they died when Justin Trudeau got elected. I just want to read a comment from Laurentian Buteri. He says, Lowell, Nick, Joe, Chris, and John in the Senate would finally get this country back on track, I think. Our audience has a great sense of humor. I really enjoy the comments that come on, and I try to mention them as often as I can. Sometimes you get caught up in a conversation, you can't go to it. The number to call, if you want to call in, by all means, we certainly encourage you to do so. 613-413-2217. I'm trying to follow John's advice and say that more often so we get some phone calls. But no, it's been an amazing ride for Mr. Pierre. I wish him the best. And there's still a part of me, as much as I personally like Pierre, I certainly hope that we don't get Doug Forded, because when Doug got elected the first time, he was out there saying all the right things. He was giving out his cell phone number. You could call him anytime you wanted to. And it wasn't just something that went to text message. He would actually call you back, or at least send you a note, a voicemail saying, hey, it's Doug. I've just got your phone call. Here's, you raised this point. Here's my answer. So there was a lot of good things going on. But after he got elected, all of a sudden he made a hard left turn and hasn't been conservative since about day 5. He'll claim that he is, but the way he ran Ontario during the pandemic was anathema to what a conservative should have done.
Yeah, I'm so surprised by that, and disappointed too, because I was expecting better of Doug Ford. And it's not like the opposition is really strong in Ontario right now, so he could have conducted himself as a true conservative and come out with flying colors. So I
Yeah,
don't understand why he felt like he had to be like so many of the other maybe left wing U.S. governors or left wing
I don't know.
premiers. Yeah, I
I don't
don't
know why.
understand.
But the reason I mentioned that though is because there's still part of me that's afraid of that, even with Pierre, because I've been burned a number of times supporting people who turn out to be nothing but sheep's and wolves in sheep's clothing. I don't think that'll happen this time, but still there's this tiny hesitation, and I comment on everybody in politics or those who deserve to be commented on and ignore the idiots because I don't want to give them any more time than necessary. But at the same time, a guy like Pierre there's a very good chance, at least 50-50, that he'll be our next prime minister. And I certainly hope he does what he says he's going to do. Now, nobody fills all their promises. I don't
No,
know that that's possible. There's too much resistance from different groups in different areas. But in the areas of energy, in the areas of immigration, things like this, I haven't heard him say anything about defense. I'd love to hear what he wants to do with defense, because if he ever to appoint me as undersecretary or uh, assistant director of the military, what they call EDC, I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but anyway, believe me, I'd make some changes, and that be big changes that a lot of people wouldn't like. But that's too bad, because the military is about killing people and breaking things, not about social reform. And that's just the way it is. Anyway, so if he does become the next prime minister, I'm certainly hoping that he keeps the majority of his promises.
yeah. Now some people in the media, and this is like talk about laziness. They're comparing him to Trump and say, "Oh, he's like the Trump North and whatnot." It's like this. It's so ridiculous. But you know how he is like Donald Trump, though, is the way he handles reporters. Because if you saw the way he handled David Aiken last week,
Oh
that
my!
was like a master class in how to deal with a media bully. And he put him in his place, and I thought that was fantastic the way he handled that.
What happened to Aiken? Like, he just went ballistic. I saw that, and I'm thinking, David, do you realize what you look like? You're supposed to
Yeah,
be a professional. You're supposed to just be interested in the truth. And the fact that the prime minister, the leader of the Queen King's opposition, I got to change that now, the
yeah,
loyal King's opposition, or the King's loyal opposition, to get the phrase right, um, you treat him with that much disrespect. He said he'd answer your questions. He was there to make an announcement. If when it's over and he opens the podium to questions and you want to ask him a question, fine. And if he doesn't give you the answer you want, fine. You can report all of that. That's what reporters are supposed to do. But to
sure.
go off like a Titan rocket like that was completely unprofessional. Now, will he pay a price for it? Yeah, maybe, maybe not. I doubt it. But this is why people don't trust the press.
Yeah. And I've been familiar with David Aiken's work over the years, and I thought he was always like a fair and balanced kind of reporter, but
Well, certainly
that
a lot
seems so
better than
out of character from what he used to be. I don't know what brought that on. Maybe it's watching U.S. politics and seeing. Remember Jim Acosta, how he used to spar with Donald Trump in the press room, and those were some classic battles too. I kind of miss those.
that. Well, actually, I think what Mr. Aiken has demonstrated is someone who's deeply affected with the DPS, which is the deranged Pierre syndrome. It
Hmm.
just doesn't matter what Pierre says, doesn't matter what he does. Aiken is going to, he just doesn't like the guy, which is a
Yeah,
very unprofessional way to do it. And I'm playing a little bit with the Trump derangement syndrome, because look, like him or hate him, the country was a lot better off, and I'm talking about the U.S. Under Donald Trump than it has been in, like, Sleepy Joe has destroyed that country in the 18 to 20 months that he's been in office, and just absolutely trashed it. And there's nobody to blame but him. And yet people still want, it's like the media down there misses Trump. And I said this before, I'll say it again. I think the best ticket that the conservatives could put forward is have Trump run for president and DeSantis of Florida run as vice. And boy, I'll tell you what, that would be a ticket that would just steamroll the Democrats. So I'm
That would
getting
be
ahead.
interesting.
But
I'm not sure if I would cheer for that ticket or not. It's hard to say. I like DeSantis. I like the way he conducts himself too. DeSantis and Pierre Poilievre actually have a lot in common. They're not afraid of the media. They know that the left-wing press doesn't like them, and they're not afraid of them. And they'll just come out and do what they want, and take their lumps. So
Yeah.
I think that Pierre has taken a page out of that book too, which is going to be useful for him going forward.
Well, this is what people, I think this is what people really crave, is for real leadership that doesn't put up with the nonsense or the softballs thrown to people that the media like. Justin Trudeau, Biden, you pick the guy, Chrystia Freeland, Kamala Harris. You know, these people, they never really get grilled the way they would if the guy wore a blue, or in the States case, a red tie. They just don't do it. And people have had enough of that. And that's why trust in the media is, of all the institutions, at the lowest it's ever been in our history. In the United States, it's down to 29% of people trust the media. In Canada, it's a 30 or 40%, which is remarkable to me, considering how often we get lied to by the media.
Right. And speaking of the media and the Prime Minister talking to the media, do you remember, I guess it was last year, a year ago during the pandemic, when Rebel News was at a press conference, and Alexa Lavoie from Rebel News asked the Prime Minister a question, a really good question, and instead of answering the question, he just says, "Oh, I don't speak to your news agency. You guys aren't even a news agency." Well, they were there. They were in the press room, so obviously they're a news agency. And instead of answering the question, he just says, "Well, I'm not speaking to you." Well, Pierre Poilievre could have done that to David Akin. "Oh, I'm just not speaking to you." But you know, you shouldn't get to pick and choose which media you answer questions from in a scrum when you're the Prime Minister or President of any country. Once those reporters are in the room, whether you like the agency or not, you have to respond to them. Trump always responded to CNN, to Jim Acosta. He didn't say, "I'm not talking to you guys." He would call them fake news, but he would still address his question.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think, as a matter of fact, I can identify, and I did this with Clinton too. When Clinton got elected, there was a moment in his campaign that turned the tide and guaranteed the fact he would win. That's when he went on the late night show and played the saxophone, and everybody just fell in love with him. Oh man, you know, that was his moment. In the case of Trump, the thing that got him elected was the night he looked at that reporter, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been this Jim Acosta, but he says, no, you're the problem. It's you. You're fake news. And the whole country stood up and cheered, and that was the moment. That's what won Trump the presidency. Now the media had went ballistic. Well, we all know the history. I'm not going to repeat it. Besides, it's time to take a break. We're a little bit over. Anyway, with that said, stick around, folks. We'll be back with the Nick and Joe Show. My guest, Chris Fraser, guest host Chris Fraser, and I will be right back after this.
We all know that climate change is real. But with countries like China and India failing to do their part, what Canadians need now more than ever is a Made in Canada climate change plan. A real plan that responds to the real-world needs of Canadians. A balanced plan that supports responsible economic growth and strengthens our essential infrastructure. A responsible plan that protects our natural environment and ensures that all Canadians, enjoy the blessings of clean air, clean land, and clean water for generations to come. It's time for Canadian politicians to show real leadership in the world, putting partisanship and ideology aside. It's time for a sensible climate plan. We're the International Climate Science Coalition Canada, and we're ready to help. To learn more, visit our website, icsc-canada.com.
All right, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. I'm Nick. This is my guest host for this evening, Chris Frazier. He'll be with us for another half hour because, believe it or not, he has a life. And he also has a campaign to run. He's running for municipal council in the city of Ottawa, as is my regular guest, my regular co-host, Joseph Benamy. So if you're in the city of Ottawa, look these guys up. Check out what they stand for and what they want to do when they get elected to municipal council. And if you like what you read, and if you're listening to the show, you probably do, then if they are looking for your vote specifically, if you're in their riding, in their ward, vote for them. Because these guys, they're the real deal. I put my stamp of approval on both of them. And Craig down there in Calabogie, if you're down in his neck of the woods, he's got my blessing too. By all means, Craig, go get him. You can call us tonight and give us your input on the topics we're talking about. Or if you want to take us in a completely different direction, you're certainly free to do that. 613-413-2217 is the number, 613-413-2217. We are all about phone calls, and when we get them, we don't even bite hard. Anyway.
I've been calling talk radio since I was a teenager, I think. It's just one of those things that I've always done. And it's kind of scary at first when the first time you make a call to a talk radio, but after you do it a few times, it gets easier, and you realize that it's also good practice for your communication skills, because you know that people are going to be listening to you, so you want to talk slower, get rid of the ums and ahs and the crutch words, and you want to think before you speak. But I highly recommend it. Then don't be afraid of making a fool of yourself. You won't do that, and if you do, people will forget by next week.
That's right. That's why we only do a show a week. I can remember one night when I was still on terrestrial radio talking about getting rid of the crunch words and the ums and the ahs. I was talking about the doublespeak and the word salads that politicians use. And trying to wind up the segment, I got caught up in it. And I was using words, well, notwithstanding this or that. And I'm just going, and all of a sudden it hit me. Wait a minute. I'm doing exactly the same thing. Take us to a break. I got to get out of this cycle. It was funny. I got a kick out of it. I've thought about it later, and I got quite a kick out of it. One of the things I did want to do, I want to switch over to talking about our glorious leader and his performance over in Britain. Now, I knew he was going to embarrass us. He does this every single time he goes overseas. No world leader wants anything to do with him. Nobody takes him seriously. So what does he do? Well, John, if we have the music and video, let's show them. That's enough for that. That was our prime minister. I know the audio wasn't great, recorded on somebody's cell phone. Imagine that, somebody catching a dignitary or a high profile person on a video with a video. Oh my God. Let me set the stage for you if you haven't figured it out already. He's in England. We are the leading country in the English Commonwealth. Okay? That means we're the biggest economy. We're the biggest ally. The Queen was, now it's the King, our head of state, and the head of our government. The head of state is for Canada is the Governor General, but that's appointed on suggestion of the Prime Minister by the monarch, in this case, the King. Anyway, so Queen Elizabeth has just died. He's there to represent all of us at this most somber event, whether you're a monarchist or not. And I am. I tend to like the monarchy, especially I had a fondness for Queen Elizabeth because she was a lady of class, of dignity. She wasn't during all the way back to before she was queen, when she's still a princess. She became a mechanic and a driver, rolled up her sleeves and got in there during World War II. Stayed in England, stayed in Buckingham Palace, and took the same risks that everybody else took. And she won the hearts and minds of the Western world for doing it, not just Britain, but for. And so when she became queen in the 1950, was it
52? I think it was
52 when her dad died, King George the Eighth. I'm a little fuzzy on that, but when her father, who was king, passed away, she became queen. And I remember seeing a video recording of her giving her first speech from Kenya, from Africa, when she was visiting Africa, talking about the way she wanted to reign and how she hoped she would be a servant of the people. And she lived that out for 70 years. She's the longest reigning monarch in history. That's taken in a lot of people. So
for sure,
our head of state, our government, our prime minister, the guy who's supposed to represent, you know what? It would have been better if he'd stayed home and sent the Governor General instead. It would have been better, because what you just saw was him dressed in a plain T-shirt, singing the Queen song Bohemian Rhapsody, about a guy. There's a lot of different meanings you can apply to Bohemian Rhapsody, but the very first line to the song is, "Mama just killed a man, put a gun against his head, pulled my trigger, now he's dead." This is a tribute to one of the most beloved monarchs in history? What are you, in cheap hallucinogens? So he went over there and completely made a total ass of himself on our behalf. Isn't that nice? Go ahead, Chris, jump in.
Yeah, when I first saw the video, I don't know if I would say I was shocked. I was a little bit surprised. And I was looking at it and say, okay, well, what was the context? Where was this taking place? And apparently it was in the lobby. Yeah, I always like to give people a little bit of grace, a little bit of leeway. And my thoughts of this were, okay, he was there for the weekend. I think this was on the Saturday night, so two nights before the funeral. I can understand if you're in a private room somewhere and you're having a few drinks with some people and there's no cameras on, and someone's playing the piano and you're trying to lighten the mood outside of the public eye. But when you're in a lobby and you know that somebody could be recording you, that it wasn't so much to me that it was disrespectful. It was just like he never thinks about how is this going to look if somebody sees this on video at some point. It's just like it just didn't enter his mind, I guess. I don't know.
That is the definition of disrespectful. If you don't think about the consequences, you are by default being disrespectful. Look, I hear what you're saying, but there were 500 world leaders at this event. Where was the premier, or the head of Germany doing something like this, or the head of Italy, or the head of, you name the country? Even the Americans didn't do this with Sleepy Joe Biden. Okay, they were smart enough to know this is not the time to this is not a sing song. Okay, and by the way, there's a reason why most people do not cover Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen is because it's a masterpiece. So you're doing a double insult. First of all, you can't come anywhere near good enough. Now, if you're doing it privately and there's nobody around, who cares? But you're the head of a country. You're supposed to be dignified. You're supposed to be somber. And you sit and lean up against a piano and sing a song you have no business singing. The irony of it being a Queen song. Thank God he didn't do another one, Bites the Dust.
Yeah, somebody has put that up on Facebook as a meme, actually. But this is not the same as Brian Mulroney and Ronald Reagan singing "When Irish Eyes Were Smiling." It's not the same thing.
Not the same thing at all. They were joking. They were having fun. It was a fun event. There was no funeral. There was no funeral. No. The Queen wasn't laying in state. Oh my God!
Right.
I saw this and I just about lost my Look, I expect this kind of behavior out of him. That's why I started by saying I knew he was going to embarrass us. But of all the things he's done, the India trip, the going to NATO or the UN and having nothing to say and nobody wants to shake his hand. He's sitting a lost little boy. All these things that have happened on the international stage, nothing compares to this embarrassment. Nothing. We had the RCMP leading the procession of the Queen's coffin. That is a huge honor. And what did he do? He peed all over it by being an ass. And I'm using strong language, but I'm sorry. It makes me furious when I see how simple it could have been. All he had to do was be a good boy for 2 days. Walk down that with the casket, with the world leaders, sit in the church he doesn't believe in, sit there and just look sad. And when it's all over, then he gets on an airplane, flies home. Then he can do what he wants, which he'd do anyway.
Yeah.
But
it's surprising because up until that point, everything he said in the press was actually kind of impressive. He said the right things. He did the right things when he talked about the Queen, and he said very flattering things about the Queen, up until that point. So he had it made. He just couldn't resist. Just couldn't resist.
Just this, and this is what's wrong. When you have no substance to your character, this is the kind of things that you do. He's an absolute. If I'm not getting attention, then nobody gets attention kind of guy. I think the word for that is nihilism. I might be wrong. But look, dude, you're representing 40 million people. You do not have license to do whatever you want. You're not king. You are the people's representative. You are the people's servant. To use a religious phrase from the Vatican, he is a servant of servants. That's what he is. Well, that never enters this thick skull of his. So,
well, in some ways,
I'm not ranting. It's just I'm just furious. It's the first chance I've had to vent about it.
Right.
You're doing a good job putting up with me.
Yeah. Besides, I can't excuse his behavior, but at the same time, I can understand in one way why he does it, because he gets away with it. So it seems like no matter what he does, he never seems to have to pay the price. Certainly not at election time. So when you think about it in that respect, you're thinking, well, I can do anything I want, because the next time there's an election, people will come to the polls and vote for me and my party, because in the minds of so many Canadians, he can do no wrong.
Well, you know what? I hope he keeps thinking that way, because based on the conversation you and I had in the previous half hour, that might not necessarily be true. I really do believe there is a blue wave coming, because people look at this Trudeau's Gotta Go meme or hashtag on Twitter, right? 500,000 people. They're talking about it all over the world. As a matter of fact, they are just what country was it? Was it Australia or someplace like that, talking about this and feeling, they had to say something because they've never seen this out of Canada before. And generally speaking, the world doesn't pay much attention to us. But under his leadership, we have gotten more attention that we didn't want than at any time in our history that I can think of.
Yeah, I agree. Any other topics you want to cover in the next 15 minutes?
Yeah, let's, as a matter of fact, speaking of Trudeau, let's move on to the next one, which another mind blower. And I think this is part of Pierre Poilievre's influence. He suddenly decided that he's going to drop the ArriveCAN, that's going to be optional, ArriveCAN app, and that all the other mandates are all going to be suspended. There won't be any more mandates. The only thing he kept was to get on an airplane or a plane, you still need a mask. Now, there are by now hundreds, if not thousands of studies showing the absolute waste of time these masks are. So it's not about the science. Why would we keep that? It just I
don't understand it. People are going to sporting events now. We're going to theaters. We're going to bingo halls with no masks on. For some reason, you're in danger if you're sitting beside somebody without a mask on an airplane. I mean, if you want to wear the mask, and if you're a person on an airplane and you feel like you want to be protected by wearing a mask, go right ahead. But what is it not time to say, okay, well, everywhere else in society now you don't have to wear a mask. What's the big deal on an airplane?
Well, look, I have always said that if you want to wear a mask, fine. Just don't expect me to join you, because first let's I know we're going over old ground, but let's say that let's define what these masks are. These masks are the masks that we all wear with the stupid little band that goes over your nose and all that stuff. They were designed for surgeons. So should they cough, sneeze, or otherwise emit a little bit of saliva, this mask is designed to catch that, so it doesn't fall into the open wound he's working in. That's right. The only purpose they have. They were never designed to catch viruses or, maybe bacteria. They're much larger, but viruses for sure. They were never meant for any of that. So to put one of these things on is very much like using a chain link fence to stop a handful of gravel. They're completely useless. However, with that said, to your point, if you want to wear one, if that makes you emotionally more stable or comfortable, fine. I don't care. We have people walking around here in Sewell Lookout who still wear them, down the street. The other day I saw somebody driving in their vehicle with a mask on by themselves. I think it's kind of silly, but I'm not their boss. I mean, right. There's a certain, if you live in a free country and you want to be stupid, you should be allowed. A lot of people would say that about me. It's the same.
I went to the hospital. My mom had a little bit of an accident about a month ago. And when I went to visit her in the hospital, I went to visit her twice. I went to visit her on a Sunday night just after she was admitted. And I just had my regular mask on from home. The next morning when I went to pick her up, the people at the front at the entrance said, you have to wear one of our masks, like a hospital mask. And I know I've seen that situation before during the pandemic, and I always ask people, what does that say about mask wearing? When you come into a hospital situation and they say, you can't wear your mask from home, please take it off and wear one of ours, then they're admitting that your mask from home may have germs and viruses on it anyways. That's why they don't want you to wear it into the hospital. So when you walk around in a grocery store with a mask on, you don't know if the other person has had that mask for like a week or 2 weeks. So if it's a cloth one, have they washed it? So the whole thing doesn't make sense, because I know somebody else who told me that when she works in some kind of a community center environment where during the pandemic, when she went into work, she had to take off her mask and wear the community center's mask. Once again, proving that your mask from home may not be as sanitary as you think it is. So you
Yeah.
can be, if you're wearing that mask for 5 weeks and you haven't washed it, then it's not really, it might be doing more harm than good.
You know what? You have, I don't know what to add to that other than the fact that it's in a free and open society. Like we've had people, I remember people walking around in July in a full length wool coat. Okay, well, maybe they have trouble regulating their body temperature. I don't know. Am I going to
Right.
go up to them and say you're stupid? No, none of my
No.
business. So I don't have a problem with people adjusting their clothing or that kind of stuff to suit, make themselves feel comfortable or to suit the environment. It's got nothing to do with that at all. Is this whole idea that you have to. And the moment somebody tells me I have to, I dig in my heels because my answer is no, I don't. I'm an adult and I get to make my own decisions even if you don't like them. And that should be the hallmark of a free and open society as well.
Right. I'm glad the Arrive can is going away anyway, because that was so irritating. The last time I came back from the States, and I didn't even realize you had to still do the Arrive can. That was just back like 5 or 6 months ago. And then I coming right down the ramp, and the lady says, "Can I see your Arrive can thing, please?" And it's like, what? So fortunately, I had it on my phone from the previous trip. So I just put my bag down and went and activated it because I still had the app on my phone, thank goodness. And I answered the questions, went on my business. But even after I showed them the barcode from the Arrive can, then you have to go to another kiosk and put in all your information about where you've been, how long you've been there, where do you live. And it's like, well, you've got all my information in the kiosk. Like, why are we doing all this paperwork and information that you already have in one form? It's like, it's talking about overkill.
Well, I watched at least 2 videos that people took from inside their car when they approached the Canadian border. They had their passports, and when asked for their Arrive can, they said, "No, we don't use it." "Oh, but you have to." "No, we don't. There's nothing in the passport that says I have to." And they read to them right out of the cover of the passport that said, "I'm a Canadian citizen and I'm allowed to pass across this border back into my own country with no undue impediment." So he said, "Well, go pull over there to that Health Canada wants to see you." "Nope, not interested." Put it in gear and drove off.
Wow.
And I saw at least 2 videos of that. And I think if more Canadians took that attitude, this would have collapsed of its own weight a long time ago. Because unless they're willing to chase every car that crosses the border and refuses, they don't have the resources to do that. So there were ways. But the problem is that Canadians have been taught since birth to be polite and to respect authority, which under normal circumstances is an admirable trait, right? Listen to your coach, listen to your teacher, listen to your parents, listen to whoever it is, the police officer or the fireman or whatever, okay? Because they have your best interests at heart. But that's begun to go by the wayside because when we do that, we get exploited. We get taken advantage of. We get mandates put on us we don't want. And it just goes on and on and on. And when I watched those 2 videos, I must admit I cheered because that's exactly the way to deal with unjust laws. Like we, as myself as a Christian, I am called to obey the just laws laid upon me by the government.
Right, me too.
There's nothing just about this. I feel no compulsion at all to obey laws that are unjust. And if I'm wrong, I'll pay for it sooner or later. But I don't think so, because we have the right of freedom. We freedom of movement. We have the right of free speech. We have these all ingrained within our society. So that's my little blurb on that. But I tell you what, I couldn't get over watching these two really courageous couples just smoke right through there. They did they crossed the border. They didn't just drive right through. They didn't break any laws that way. They just would not play the government's game.
Right. I love the crawler on the bottom of the screen. The views of the The views of the participants do not necessarily reflect those of Blast the Radio. Good. That's cover yourself there, Mr. Producer.
You know what? And I don't have any problem with that at all because, look, there's people out there, and in our case, it's John, who may not agree with everything that we have to say. And that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. I know there's several issues that John and I are diametrically opposed on. But because there's a built-in level of respect between us, it never becomes an issue. And that is also true. Standard practice for any broadcast business. They do that for legal reasons. But I think it's also fair to say that, look, what we're really saying is anybody can call the show or be part of the show with a differing opinion. All right. Doesn't necessarily mean it reflects our views, but we invite them. I started this show by calling out people who disagree with me to call in and have a debate. Where are they? Well, we got another hour to go, so maybe they'll do it, but I'm on next. Watch out. That's right. John's going to help fill in the next hour. I've got plenty of things. You might even hear a story or two about some of the exploits I've been involved in over my life. I've got a few I want to tell. So anyway.
It's nice to have healthy debate. And we come full circle now back. We started talking about Pierre Poilievre. And what's fun about him is listening to him in the House of Commons. And by the way, if you've never been into the House of Commons, I guess if things open up again, I don't know what's happening with Central Bloc. But I did have the opportunity at least once to go to the House of Commons and sit in the gallery. And I brought my mother with me, actually. And our MP was the one that got us in. And he even sat us right near the center so we could have a great view of everything that was happening. But it's really neat just to be there and watch them debating it from the gallery. And it's one of those things every Canadian should try to do at least once in their lifetime. But you can't cheer. You can't cheer and yell like a hockey game or else you'll get kicked out.
Oh, take all my fun away. But how many did you catch playing Spider Solitaire while they should have been listening to the debate? There's a very famous video on out of the U.S. Congress where this lady's got her laptop open and she's playing solitaire on the computer instead of listening to what's going on, and somebody behind her records it and then puts it on YouTube. So she had some fast explaining to do. So anyway, well, that wraps up the first hour. Chris, thank you very much for stepping in for tonight. I appreciate your time. Good luck on the campaign trail. Keep us posted how you're doing. And I have a feeling we may see you again before it's all over, knowing the way you and Joseph are hitting the bricks. But I really hope that all three of you get elected, because we need good common sense around every municipal council table, not just Ottawa. Because if what they want to do in Ottawa is, successful by their definition,
well, thank you, Chrissy.
Other places too.
Yeah. And you know what? Even after the election is over, if I don't win my riding or my ward, I still want to be involved in the debate. I mean, I still want to hold my councillor to account, and everybody should hold their incumbent or the new person that represents you. Hold these people to account. Don't let them get away with anything just because the election is over.
Well, you'll be in a better position to hold them to account because you'll be topped up on what the issues are. Anyway, all right. With that said, we're going to say goodbye to Chris. Thank you again. I appreciate it. And when we come back, we'll have more right after this on the Nick and Joe Show.
Who says you can't turn the clock back? Experience the excitement of open-air flying and see Canada's National Capital Region like you've never seen it before from the open cockpit of a vintage 1930s biplane. Are you up for the adventure? Put on your helmet and goggles and strap yourself in. Book your flight today. Go to OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. That's OttawaBiplaneAdventures.com. Ottawa Biplane Adventures. The adventure begins here.
Oh my gosh, that was so exciting! I gotta do it again.
Hey, there he is. Welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show, folks. My name is Nick. This is the man who pushes all the buttons and does all the fancy work behind the screens, John Melky, otherwise known as Milkman. And I've asked him to kind of help out for the next hour or so.
You're just that desperate, were you?
Yeah, I was.
I mean, I'm joking, but I'm not.
I asked General Lewis Mackenzie, and I asked all kinds of people, and I even asked Jordan Peterson. Funny, I didn't get a response. Anyway, no, you're never my last choice, John.
Uh-huh.
It's just not always my first.
Yeah.
Okay, the numbers to
I
get into the
understand.
show tonight, if you want to join us in our frivolity, is 613-413-2217. I got to tell you, John, I interviewed Lou Mackenzie a couple of times, and he's one of my heroes. The first time was the only time when I was on the air where I was actually starstruck. And I because most of the time, yeah, okay, you know that old Shania Twain that don't impress me much?
Mm-hmm.
That was kind of my attitude with a lot of people I interviewed, especially politicians. But because Lou, and if you don't know who Major General?
Major General. Yep.
Yeah, Major General Lewis
Retired.
he was. Google him. This guy was probably one of our best peacetime generals we've ever had. One of his crowning achievements was during the conflict in the Balkans, he was able to open the Sarajevo airport in 3 days when no one else could get it open at all. And they were having airlift problems getting supplies into the enclaves because the Hercs that carried them couldn't get in. There were snipers in the tall buildings all around the airport. And they were picking off they were shooting at not only airplanes, but the civilians. So, make a long story short, he brought his own equipment. He brought in his own anti-sniper teams. He killed all the snipers. And 3 days later, airplanes were landing with supplies in Sarajevo because he just said, okay, this is a combat zone. This is a war. I'm going to treat it like one. Even though the UN told him no every time he wanted something, he said, fine, I'll bring it from home. And he did. And that's just one of the many stories that he told me. And I was just absolutely floored to be able to sit there and speak with a man of that caliber. He is one of the if he doesn't have the Order of Canada, well, he should. Absolutely, he should. So I don't know if you know anything about him, but
I know a little bit. I certainly remember that story. Just that ballsy. All right, fine. Here we go. We're gonna get stuff done because that's just what we do and it's what we're here to do.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't know about the Order of Canada awards. Yes, Order of Canada and the Order of Ontario as well.
Good for him. Good.
Yeah,
he should.
Yeah, it's exciting when you get to interview someone, and I know you have a military past as well on your resume. So it's exciting when you get to interview and talk to people who you absolutely have nothing but the highest regard for. I mean, in my life in music radio, I got to interview a lot of very popular stars. A lot of them were, kind of fluff, and you just sort of, you go through the interview knowing that your listeners are going to enjoy this. But every now and then you get a John Bon Jovi or a Janet Jackson interview that comes your way, and it's a whole other level.
One of the guys whose music I do not like, but I really respect, is Ted Nugent. I was never a Nugent fan, but man,
I'm the opposite. I like his music. I think he's a wingnut, and I can't stand his politics.
Yeah, well, see, there you go. I like his politics.
I know you do. That doesn't surprise me one bit.
His flip the bird attitude to the government over gun control. Yeah, I like the guy. I was never a Nugent fan. Anyway, that's besides the point. One of the things I did want to kind of broach with you, let me just bring up my list of topics to make sure I pick the right one.
Oh, we're not going to talk about masks? We're not going to go down that path?
We did.
Oh, okay. All right.
Martha's Vineyard. Yes. Okay. Now, everybody knows this story, right?
Uh-huh. Well, if they don't, why the hell are they listening to this show?
I'll fill in the blanks for the people who are listening who live under a rock.
All right.
Okay. A nice rock. We have good audience members.
Give us the Coles notes.
Ron DeSantis, who is the governor of Florida, had enough. And the southern border is a huge problem in the United States. There have been over 2 million illegal immigrants crossed the southern border since Biden took office. And Ron DeSantis is watching his neighbor states, Texas and New Mexico and places like that, get overrun with hundreds of thousands of immigrants. Like one town they were talking about had 1,700 people in it, and they were hit with 35,000 immigrants just dropped on their doorstep.
Yeah, that's Brockville appearing on your doorstep.
Yeah, pretty much. And say, okay, now you got to feed, clothe, and house them. With what? So DeSantis decided, okay, two can play this game, because nobody ever said this was done in the middle of the night. This was done, very clandestinely. And it was all over the country. It wasn't just in the border states. What Biden was doing, his administration was doing, was packing airplanes, over 900 flights, to scatter them all over the United States into counties and townships and towns and cities that were not prepared for them at all. So Ron DeSantis said, fine, two can play that game. So he took an airplane and he told some people, some of these immigrants, said, here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on the airplane. We're going to fly you to Martha's Vineyard, one of the most elite places in the world. It's a beautiful place. The fall is wonderful. You're going to really enjoy it there. And they all went, yeah, where do I sign up? And they got on the airplane and they dropped them at Martha's Vineyard. 50 people showed up at Martha's Vineyard. Remember, 200,000 a month are crossing down in the border, okay, overwhelming these border towns and states. 50 show up in Martha's Vineyard, and all of a sudden, it's human smuggling. There's got to be some kind of criminal intent here. This is playing politics with these people. This is terrible, and it's a crisis because we can't handle 50 people. Now, let me let you in on a couple of stats. There are about 17,000 people who live in Martha's Vineyard year-round. It swells to well over 200,000 in the wintertime or in the summertime. That means there's a lot of empty bedrooms, there's a lot of empty homes in Martha's Vineyard during this particular period because the tourist season's over. And you're telling me you couldn't find 50 people a house to live in while you sort this out? They were gone within 48 hours. They shipped them onto a military base. 48 hours. This was also a sanctuary. Massachusetts is a sanctuary state. Martha's Vineyard is in Massachusetts. So they basically, on the one hand, throw their arms open and say, oh, come to the United States. We'll give you sanctuary. You can come and stay here. As soon as they show up, oh, no, wait a minute. We didn't mean here. And they bust them off. The hypocrisy was it was one of the most brilliant things I think I've ever seen a politician do. Ron DeSantis and the governor of Texas, I think his name is Abbas, something like that, did the same thing. And now today or yesterday, they dropped another 50 off on Kamala Harris's front doorstep because they want to see how inclusive these people really are. And they're not inclusive at all. The hypocrisy has been exposed and everybody knows it. And the more they squawk about it, the more it becomes apparent.
Listen, it's a huge problem. The Mexican border into the United States, especially. Now, these people, they're Venezuelan, so they weren't walking across the border. Most of them coming here by plane on purpose. And going through a lot of the correct ways to, immigrate into the States as a refugee. And you're absolutely right. But the southern states is absolutely flooded with this by virtue of its proximity to Mexico and Cuba as well. They get a lot of Cubans that, make their way through there. Yeah, it becomes a problem that, people like Ron DeSantis and his government are left having to deal with. Texas, especially, California, especially, Arizona, any of the southern states. And people in the northern parts of the United States, they see it on the news. they don't necessarily understand it because they're not seeing the same kind of thing. You're not having people, cross over from Belleville, into the United States as refugees. It's just not happening. Not a whole lot of people leaving Windsor these days,
Well, Justin Trudeau keeps it up, and you will see that.
Will he
Anyway,
sing?
go ahead.
Will he sing to them as they leave? Though that's what I want.
Oh my God! Don't
The,
eat that.
the
Okay.
Prime Ministerial. That's what I'm calling him. The Prime
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
So my only issue, though, is look, and yes, it's absolutely they're playing politics and they're using human beings as pawns in that game, and I don't like it. But honestly, it's getting the attention. It's getting people talking. Maybe this is going to get to some sort of a solution. And listen, there's a bit of a gamble. Obviously, when you put people at play and you're flying them around, you're making them pawns in your little game. Yeah, there's a risk there, a calculated risk, nonetheless. That Governor DeSantis, took and came out on top of. Ballsy. And is that leadership or is it smart ass? People look at that and kind of a smart ass, kind of a smarmy way to do things. I think it's ballsy, and nobody seems to be listening to conventional means. So you got to shake it up a little bit.
Well, if you remember,
Points for creativity.
If you remember, we talked about what I would do several weeks ago.
Right.
And this is a much better solution than what I proposed at the time. I was ready to bring in the army and go into Mexico and take out the drug cartels, which probably still should be done. But DeSantis has hit upon something that exposes these people for the hypocrites they are in a way, because you're right. It's what you call it ballsy, and it is, but it's also real leadership. This is what the other side lacks. They want to feel good. They just don't want to have to pay for that feeling.
Okay, so you're talking about DeSantis putting his name on the ballot to run for president. Whether we're talking right,
as vice.
I know you would, and whether you're thinking of him for 2024 or he's on the ballot with Trump or however you envision that. Okay, right. So he gets to the White House. Now it's his problem to solve. It's one thing to be the governor of Florida and to do that. What's he going to do when he's in the White House? What's his solution from that office?
I think what he would do, I have no insights. I certainly don't know the man as much as I would love to sit down and chat with him. But he would do what was working before. Now, again, it doesn't matter whether you like Trump or not. When Trump left office, their border crossings were at the lowest in decades. What he was doing was working. First of all, you continue to finish the wall, number one. Number two, you go back to Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, where these people are coming from. And you say to them, listen, you're going to keep them here, and we're going to help you do that. And he can hold the economic knife over their head because the United States gives every one of these countries hundreds of millions of dollars a year because they're just nice people. Okay, the United States sends Mexico money, Honduras, Guatemala,
because the United States are just nice people?
Why also they do it? They don't owe them anything. They don't owe them any money. They send, I think it was Mexico gets $100 million a year.
Nick, it's just a sentence I've not heard before. And it just, the way it just sort of sat in my head there for a moment was interesting. Okay.
Yeah, well.
I don't think a lot of people around the world view the United States as being very nice.
Well, that's their problem. I think the Americans are great people. But anyway, the point is he can wield the economic knife and say, look, if you don't play ball, we're going to cut that off. And let's face it, to a country like Ecuador, Guatemala, or Mexico, those kind of numbers mean something.
Oh, they do.
And so okay, so that would be a way to keep them at the table and begin to curb that flow of people into the United States. Will you stop it overnight? Of course not. But the number one thing you've got to do is make sure that the people from Mexico stay in Mexico and that their standard of living rises. They have ways to deal with the problems they have. Do whatever you can to help those countries become better countries rather than keep them in the quagmire they're in as second world countries and not, or in some cases, even third world countries, and not simply have the brain drain, because the people who are leaving are the very people they need to help lift themselves out of the morass they're in. They have the same problem in a dozen countries around the world where people, let's say somebody born in Chad or in
Right.
you pick any in Yemen.
Sure.
Okay, the intelligence is not cornered in one specific corner of the world. They're very brilliant people from every corner of the planet. So if you have a young Yemeni who wants to make a difference in life, looks around and says, where's my best opportunity? Maybe it is the United States or Canada. But if we make Yemen a better country or help them become a better country, okay, maybe they'll want to stay and be part of that rebuilding process.
For the record, I happen to think Americans are nice too. By and large, I have a lot of American friends. I work in the States. I travel to the States. I always have a good time. But I'm just saying, I think the world at large, a lot of them look at the Americans as bullies. If we're being honest.
You know what that is? That is, first of all, that's a rather snobbish attitude. If you look at the people who think, like, take the French or, the Europeans in general, they all think the Americans are boorish.
Right.
Yeah, but the Americans are also got a shield over your head that you're not willing to pay for. That's why the American military is so big, is because they have to defend pretty much the free world, because the European powers don't want to spend the money on defense. They'd rather spend it on social programs.
Like I said, the Americans I know, the Americans I work with, the Americans I have visited with when I've been in the States, and I love going to the States, and I work there every day, by the way. Yes, we get along famously. They're no different than us. We have a lot of the same values, a lot of the same views in the world. But I think, and my only point is, outside of North America, I think, like you said, the French, the Europeans, they look at Americans as bullies. They're loud, they're brash, and yes, their military might certainly makes them come across as bullies. But you're absolutely right. They've got, if you're Canada, if you're France, if you're Britain, if you're Australia, the Americans have got your back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think this looking down their nose at Americans. Look, sometimes when you have a population the size of the United States, it's over 315 million, I think, right now. Mm-hmm. Let me tell you a quick story just to demonstrate this, because I know there's idiots in every crowd. God knows we've got our share. So I'm not trying to say we're so much better than they are. But when I was in the Navy, we went to Amsterdam. I'm going to say it was 1984. We spent, how long were we at sea? 29 days at sea, which for a Canadian destroyer was a very long time. You're crammed onto a 350-foot piece of steel that floats with 250 of your closest friends.
No thanks.
Yeah, well, trust me, you didn't have any choice. So you either liked them or hated them, but it didn't matter. You still had to work with them.
That's right.
And by the time you hit shore, there was a lot of steam to blow off. So what the supply officer did, because we were in Holland, and even in the 80s, well, especially in the 80s, even more so than now, the Dutch were nuts about Canadians because of what we'd done in World War II.
Of course.
Okay.
And they still are nuts about Canadians because of what we did in World War II.
Absolutely.
100%.
So the supply officer gave us like a 5-pound bag. He put a 5-pound bag in the main cafeteria of all these tiny little 3/4 inch wide Canadian stick pin lapel flags. Okay. And we were allowed to wear our civilian clothes ashore. So you'd get dressed up for a run ashore. That's a very old tradition, I'll tell you. Mm-hmm. And you'd put one of these stick pins on so that the Dutch would know you're not an American. Now, first words out of your mouth, they're going to know you're not an American because you don't sound like one.
Well, okay. To them, you kind of do, though.
Yeah, it's especially if you're an American from the northern, let's say the Midwest. They don't have quite the same thick accents like somebody from Boston or somebody from from
Minnesota,
or down there in Georgia. Anyway, so they have their distinct accents too.
As do we. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. You talk to somebody from Newfoundland or Cape Breton, and they'll tell you. They can spot a Cape Breton a mile away, and Cape Breton can spot a Newfie a mile away.
Boy, geez, you're right there, boy, eh?
Yeah. You stays where he is while he gets to where you're at. Anyway.
Here come the emails now. How dare you mock us? Yeah.
Hey, listen, they mock themselves faster than we ever could.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so I ran into an American sailor. They had to go ashore in their dress blues, but they would carry a duffel bag, and in it would be their civvies. So the first chance they got, they'd change. Okay. And this guy came up and he said to me, And I can't get the locals to talk to me. And I thought to myself, gee, I wonder why. And he said, I really want, I think my chances with the local ladies might be better if they thought I was from Canada. Do you have one of them little Canadian pins you put on your lapel? And I just happen to have one in my pocket in case mine fell off. I said, well, I got to buy them. And they're about $10 a piece. So I tell you what, this is my last one. So you give me $15 and I'll give it. Now, we were given to them for free. So
I was going to say, I was about to call you out on that.
Yeah, absolutely. No doubt about it. No shame
I'm
here.
seeing right through you, buddy.
Yeah. Well, you got to make a little money somehow. Saying if you got a customer willing to spend
Very
it,
American of you, by the way.
Anyway, so I said, I gave him that. He gave me the money. And because anyway, he put it on. He says, I said, now you got to remember, they're going to ask you questions about Canada. So you better be ready with some answers. Oh, gee, thanks, man. What should I be telling them? I said, well, the first thing you want to know, they're going to want to know is where are you from? And the Dutch know their Canadian geography. So you have to tell them that you're from Manitoba and the capital of that city, that province is Toronto.
You bastard.
And he said, gee, thanks, buddy. I wish more Canadians were like you. And I kind of laughed at myself as I walked down the jetty. So do I. Anyway, so he went ashore. I never saw him again, but we had a ball. But the whole point of that story is he was ignorant of anything outside the United States.
Right.
Not because he was ignorant, but because their education system concentrates on the United States.
It does, yeah.
And to be fair, we could use a little more of that here in Canada to concentrate on our own history a lot more than we do.
Oh.
I'm not against learning other countries' history.
No, but the lack, and I'm waiting for Lowell. I'm begging Lowell. He's now done 452 shows here on this radio station. I am begging him quietly, please do your infamous Canadian quiz, because it is always astounding just how little Canadians know about Canada. And I keep watching these videos. They pop up every now and then on social media where people go out onto the streets and they just ask simple little things. I saw one out of the States the other day. They were asking Americans to find Ukraine on the map.
Oh, yeah.
And then where was Russia? So they're pointing to like Cuba, saying that that's the Ukraine. It's just, and it's farcical.
Absolutely.
But you know, if you do the same thing to a Canadian, and the one and I'm sure you've heard Lowell do it too, where he asks young people, "Where's the St. Lawrence River?" and they have no idea. Yet they're calling from Riverside South. The St. Lawrence River is 30 minutes down the road from them.
You know what? We should do that some night.
Sure,
that would be fun because I love Canadian history. I'm no expert in it. There's lots of holes in my knowledge. But
mine too, of course.
But as an example, one of the first questions I would ask on a quiz like that is, who is the father of Canada?
Who's the father of Canada?
Yep.
Well, I mean, I want to say Sir John A.
Nope. He was the first prime minister, very significant, no
doubt. Which is why I want to say Sir John A.
Yeah, no, it was Major General James Wolfe.
Okay.
Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Because of his victory, we stayed a British colony. If he'd lost and the French had won, we would still be under French colonial rule, and our history and our politics would have been completely different. So therefore, James Wolfe is the father of Canada, because his victory is the mark in time where Canadian history separates itself and becomes distinct from North American history.
So that is the Canadian equivalent then to asking, who's the first president of the United States? George Washington.
George Washington.
Yeah, and knowing the story of the cherry tree and the whole 9 yards. Which, here I am knowing the story of the cherry tree and the whole 9 yards. I don't know much about Wolfe.
Speaking of trees, here's a question for you. And I didn't mean to get into this, but this is perfect.
Well, you and I don't have a chance to really plan where things go either, so it's
No, that's true.
right.
But what link does Canada have with the assassination of John F. Kennedy?
Nope, blank.
Okay. John F. Kennedy was in Canada the week before he was shot. And he didn't like the premier or the prime minister at the time. But
Was that Diefenbaker?
was it Dief? Yeah, he preferred Pearson.
Right.
Anyway, he didn't like Dief to Chief. But what dignitaries did in those days, and they might still do it for now, all I know, is they would plant a tree over at Rideau Hall.
Yes.
He did, and he hurt his back. John F. Kennedy was not a healthy man. So he hurt his back and had to wear a brace because of the injury. Fast forward to Dallas. He's sitting in the car. He's wearing the brace that he had to put on because of his injury, planting a maple tree in Rideau Hall, or on the grounds of Rideau Hall.
Wow.
And that's why he couldn't fall forward after the first shot, because he was wearing that brace that he picked up in Canada. There's a little piece of trivia you didn't know.
You know I'm going to Google that later, right?
Be my guest.
Yeah.
Be
I'm
my
not
guest.
doubting. I'm not doubting. I just haven't heard the story, so I'm going to go. I'm going to go looking for it.
I forget what book I read it in, but it was in. It was in
a book,
yeah.
not the internet. A book.
I believe it or not,
it
I
may-
still know how to read a book.
It may actually have a chance to be true. Then, Nick, is all I'm saying.
Yep. So I'll ask you one more Canadian question that I think every Canadian should know.
All right. Oh,
Who's
God.
Private Leo Major?
I'm sorry. I was talking when you were talking.
Who is? Why should we know the name? Or what did Private Leo Major? I'm trying to phrase this correctly. Why should we know the name of Private Leo Major?
Not knowing the name of Private Leo Major. See, you're making me look like a fool.
No, because nobody knows this, or very few.
All right.
So you're in good company.
I don't know.
Private Leo Major was with the Regiment de la Chaudière on D-Day. And on D-Day, I'm going to give you a synopsis of his history during World War II. He went ashore. He captured a German communication car and everybody in it, drove it back to his regiment, had to stand on top to get people to stop shooting at it because the British and the Canadian anti-tank gunners were lousy at the time, couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, and he had to get up on top and say, "Stop shooting, I'm on your side."
Right, I'm in a German vehicle, but I'm
Right.
Yeah, I got it.
I captured it. Don't blow me up. Anyway, yeah, I'm getting to that. Don't steal my thunder.
For those listening on the air, Craig's just jumped in with like a whole
Anyway,
paragraph with the answer. He's
It
just
was about day 5 or 6. I can't remember which one. He stumbles across a squad of SS soldiers, kills them all by himself, about 5 or 6 of them. But as a dying act, one of them throws a phosphorus grenade, and the explosion hits him in the eye, takes out his eye. Now, no, you're not sorry. You enjoyed that. Anyway, it takes out his eye. And for anybody else, that's enough for a trip home, right? He says, "I'm not going home. I can still shoot. They didn't get my shooting eye. I only need one eye to aim a rifle." So he's taking some people. They've got a half track or a lorry of some kind with a mix of German and Canadian injured in the back, a Padre in the front, and he's with them. It hits a landmine. It explodes. It throws the landmine. It kills everybody but him. He's got a broken back, 2 broken ankles, and 3 broken ribs. So they take him to the hospital, and they're going to send him home. No, not going home. So he sneaks out of the hospital after about 3 weeks, and he finishes his convalescence with the Dutch family he has befriended. Then he goes back to his unit, and his commanding officer said, "You know what? I should court-martial you for being AWOL, But if you want to fight that bad, I'm not gonna do that.
That's right.
So he gives him this mission that Craig alluded to. He and his buddy Willie Arsenault go into a town called, I think it said Zoll. I can never get it right. All by themselves, and their only job is just to reconnoiter the town.
ZWOLLE is how it's spelled. Zwol.
Yeah,
Zwol. Yeah.
Zoll.
I
just
would
because
never clue.
W is V, I think. So
Okay.
Zoll or something like that.
Right.
So my apologies to any Dutch people who speak Dutch listening. I'm not trying to butcher the name. I'm just doing a really good job of it. Anyway, his job was to go in and reconnoiter the town to find out how strong the Germans were in town, because in the morning they were going to start an artillery barrage and liberate the town. So in the process, Willie gets killed. He makes some noise. A German machine gun post hears him, shoots Willie. Well, that makes our hero, Leo Major, thoroughly pissed off. He charges the nest with his Thompson machine gun, kills 3 of them, drives off 2 more, grabs a bag of grenades and another Schmeiser and a handful of magazines, and then begins to liberate the town. He comes across a German officer in a bar, tells a man to surrender because in the morning they're going to start the bombardment, and if he doesn't want his troops killed, that they really should surrender and leave the town. So he unloads the officer's pistol, gives it back to him. The guy holsters his pistol, gets in his truck, and drives off. And he was told to go and surrender himself to the Canadian forces. He comes across the headquarters for the Gestapo, kills everybody in it, burns it to the ground, and spends the rest of the night throwing grenades, shooting at anything that looks like Germans, and causing as much chaos as he can. And by the time the sun comes up in the morning, he's driven off 800 soldiers and captured dozens more. He'd march them back 10 at a time and then go back and continue what he was doing, all by himself. The biggest, and when it was asked about it later, the hardest part of the whole thing was getting the Dutch to believe that this one-eyed crazy man with 2 smoking machine guns and a half-full bag of grenades walking down the street screaming, "It's okay to come out now," was believable. So he liberated a whole city by himself.
These are great stories. Why? I mean, every kid in school, I would have been mesmerized to hear stories like that.
I know, that's the
Why
point.
is this not taught?
See, this is my point. It's what I love about history. Now, to continue the story, he finished World War II. He got 2 Distinguished Service Medals. One he refused from Montgomery because he didn't like Montgomery. He took the second one. Goes back as a pipe fitter to Montreal. Carrillo comes along. He re-enlists. He goes as a sniper, one-eyed sniper. Gotta love it. Crawls into a Chinese position of about 3,000 men with 19 of his closest friends, and waits till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then just stands up and starts shooting in every direction. The Chinese think they're under a major assault, and they start shooting at each other, and eventually they all run away. And this is why we should know who this guy is. Because he was he makes Rambo look like a Boy Scout. Like if I say Audie Murphy, everybody knows who that is. But this guy is just unfreaking believable. I'm not putting down Audie Murphy. He did some incredible stuff too. But Leo Major, you don't mess with that guy.
It's amazing.
I did that story when I did Answer the Call. I put it on a disc and I sent it down to him because he was still alive at the time. And I asked him if first of all, did I get my facts straight?
Right.
And secondly, I wanted to know that I knew about his story and I was going to play it on the air, and he was just tickled pink. He just loved it.
We are so unaware, and we're so, compared to the Americans, who I just, earlier said they're so loud and they're so brash. They do patriotism right. They are so proud
Absolutely.
and so aware of their history and unabashed about it. And we are the opposites. And I kind of teased you earlier saying, when you were talking about, selling your pins for $15 when they cost you nothing, telling the guy, it cost you 10. I kind of took a shot at you, said very American of you, but it's true. And as a business person here, and I started my first business in 1996. That is something people have said to me for the longest time. If you were doing this, but in the States, you would be a multimillionaire. Here in Canada, people look at you like, why would you want to do your own thing?
Because that's who I am. But I could sit here, John, and tell you story after story after story.
Well, I enjoyed that.
Well,
so thank you.
It's just when it comes to our military history, we stand head and shoulders above everybody else. There have been dark spots in our history. I'm not going to deny that.
Every country has dark spots.
Right. And that was going to be my next point. When you engage in war, sometimes it brings out the very worst and even the best people. So that said, we have the fewest sins on our soul when it comes to how our military performs. You want to talk about heroes, talk about Afghanistan. You don't have to go back to World War II.
For sure.
There was a case of a guy called Vaughn was his last name, Sergeant Vaughn from Newfoundland. He was with the 2nd PPCLI, which is one of our, well, we only have 3 regiments, the RCR, the Royal 22nd, and the PPCLI.
Simon Vaughn, Afghanistan. Got him on Google now. Okay.
Yeah. His story. He should have got the Victoria Cross, but they were attacking a place called the White School, and they took the school. And while they're in there, one of the Taliban, hit the school with a rocket-propelled grenade, and it comes through the wall, and it mortally injures him and somebody laying beside him. Rather than deal with himself, now remember, he had to fight his way to get into the school, so he's under fire the whole time. He takes the battle dressing off his helmet and he applies it to the guy beside him, even though they're both dying. And finally says, fellas, I don't think I'm going to make it. And he passes away. We lost a fantastic man. I called his regimental commander in Edmonton, where the unit is based. And I asked, now at the time, I didn't know that the guy that I was talking to had the Star of Courage, which is the one just below the Victoria Cross. Yeah, there he is. What a hero. Man, that guy inspires me. But anyway, the point is that I asked him, so what more do you have to do to win the Victoria Cross? We haven't handed one out since World War II with, the last guy to get it was flying an F-4U Corsair, attacked a Japanese Corvette or destroyer and sank it, and then was killed in the process. I'm trying to think of his name. I want to say Graham, but anyway, you can look
Sergeant Ernest Smokey Smith.
No, that wasn't the last one.
Okay.
I know Smokey Smith's story. That was in Italy. This one was fighting in Japan, or in the
Lance Corporal Joshua Leakey.
Nope. Look up last Canadian VC.
You know what the problem is? I didn't put Canada in there. I'm getting the UK. Stupid me. I should know better.
There's a street in Winnipeg. I was just there, called Valor Road. And in World War I, there were 4 VCs won by people who lived on that street. And the VC is the hardest medal in the world to win. Anyway, doggone it, it's going to bug me. It's on the tip of my tongue.
I'm working on it. We're also over time, by the way.
Anyway, the point is, I asked this officer, it was a colonel or something like that. I said, why didn't you award? Because it's a regimental decision about who to recommend for awards. So why didn't you recommend Vaughn or Sergeant Ingram for the VC? He said, well, we didn't quite feel it quite met the standard. I said to him, what more do you got to do? I mean, the chances of surviving a VC winning event are 1 in 10. 1 in 10. So of 100 guys who get the VC, only 10 win it,
Right.
live to have it awarded. Oh, come on.
This should not be this hard to find.
No,
I'm
it's-
all over Google right now and nothing.
Okay. Well, anyway, the last one handed out was at the end of World War II. And I can't think that there wasn't somebody who deserved one out of Afghanistan. Another story about a guy whose name I can't remember now, but they were going into a Taliban village with an LAV, which the Taliban were terrified of, these big LAVs that we have. And he was firing the machine gun, or the heavy cannon, the 27 millimeter cannon. It jammed. So he switched to the machine gun, what they call the coaxial machine gun, which fires alongside the barrel of the heavier cannon. And when that jammed, he got up on the commander's position, totally exposed to the enemy, and was using it when it jammed. So he field strips it under fire, oils it up, gets it going again, turns the machine gun around just as a guy pops up from behind a wall with an RPG and mows him down, and screaming at the Taliban, "You want more of me? Come and get it." I mean, these guys these are average, everyday, normal people who live in Canada, who volunteered. This was a reserve unit that did it. This was the Hamilton Light Infantry out of Hamilton. And just unbelievable, the kind of things. There's a great video on YouTube. Canada is a very peaceful place until they hear the word war. And it talks about our history in combat. And I'm telling you, John, we have nothing to be ashamed of.
No, we don't. But we also don't really pay any attention to our history. And it bothers me. And I've talked about this in the past, how little we know about ourselves. And yet you look around and like, we just lost our beloved, Her Majesty. And the number of people who are mouthing off on social media about, all these horrible things that she did, and why people of color and Indigenous people have, no time or need for her, and like, they just have no understanding of the history of who she was, where she came from. And you talked about that earlier. She rolled up her sleeves and she got to work. I mean, the photographs of her working as a mechanic during the war, that's impressive.
You got that right. I could spend hours. I did 200 of these kinds of stories when I was doing Answer the Call. And I'll tell you, let me give you another example of a name everybody should know. And if you know it, there's one reason why you'd know it. And that is Harry DeWolf. Does that name ring a bell?
That does, yes.
Yes. You know why? Because the Navy just commissioned a ship with his name.
Yes.
That's why you know it.
That's where because it came, I was just going to say, it's top of mind for some reason.
That's why.
Right.
Now, if it wasn't for that, you would never know. He was the most efficient and fighting sailor we ever put to sea. He was a very meek and mild man. He was very gentle in every aspect of his life until you put him on the bridge of a tribal class destroyer called Haida, which is still in Hamilton. Why we haven't made a movie about this? Let me tell you a quick story. Her sister ship Athabaskan, they were tribal class, were very powerful. They're like pocket cruisers. They were very fast, heavily armed, and something you didn't tangle with unless you had no choice. Well, Athabaskan got torpedoed one night, and the crews of the two ships, Athabaskan and Haida, were very, very close. They were in the same class. They were the elite fighting units of the Canadian Navy during World War II. The motor torpedo boat guys might argue with me on that. But as far as surface ships are concerned, they were the cat's meow. Everybody wanted to be on a tribal. So anyway, they lost to Athabaskan on April 23rd. And Commander Tibbs, I can't remember now, was killed. And the last thing anybody heard him was, "Go get him, Haida." He yelled at the Haida as they went off to engage. The Haida engaged a ship from a German destroyer, which is heavier armed and faster, over about 11 hours. And during that 11 hours, they were in a running gunfight. And finally, Haida drove her up on the shore and pounded it into the surf. And they had to send aircraft over to finish it off in the morning. But she was a flaming wreck by the time he was done. Mm. He sank 11 enemy warships, one submarine, and they tried to sink a target because on radar it looked like a ship. So they blew it full of holes. They went in Korea. Now the Wolf was gone by then, but in Korea, the Haida was so good at naval gunnery. They used to have a competition. They entered what was called the train busting club, because in Korea, a lot of the trains ran along the coast, and the North Koreans were using them to resupply their troops. So if you could knock off the locomotive, you killed the whole train. So there was this train busting group, and then they had a gunnery competition. The Haida won it so often that they had to exclude her from the competition to give everybody else a chance. But Harry DeWolf was a skipper when she was at her peak, and she was just the single best thing we had afloat, and nobody knows anything about him. And it's a tragedy. You remember see the movie Grey Wolf?
No.
That was with Tom Hanks and the destroyer captain taking a convoy across the Atlantic. There were some problems with it, but overall I thought it was a pretty good movie.
A few weeks ago, you had me on the show, and we discussed my lack of movie prowess.
Oh, that's right. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we're going to have to work on you on that. But the point I'm making is that we could very easily make a much better movie about Haida if we could just find the funding. I actually approached a screenwriter about it about 10 years ago.
So, look, I get that. Here's where my brain goes to, and again, here I am being business person. Why are you not doing a podcast telling these stories?
Maybe I should.
Maybe you should.
Because there's no end of them. Like I could tell you the story of Leonard Burchell, who saved Ceylon from a Japanese invasion. I could tell you the story of William Collishaw, who started fighting in 1914 and didn't quit till 1942. That story. Yes, that's a great tour, Greg. If you ever get a chance to take the tour, if you're in Hamilton, by all means, especially get down to the boiler room, because that's where everything happens. That's what matters. If the boiler room isn't working, nothing's working. And yes, I'm biased. Yes, I will choose to work.
You were in the boiler room, weren't you? Yeah.
But trust me, with no steam and no electricity, you ain't going anywhere.
So Gregory's comment for those listening: I was on the Haida as a kid when she was moored at Ontario Place. Fun tour.
Yes, it's a great tour. But I was, I had a conversation. We have different trades in the Navy, of course. One is called bosun, and a bosun is a guy who works with ties the ship up, paints the ship, looks after the small arms, runs the sailing evolutions with the small boat and things like that. The requirement for them is not very technical. Okay, it's more hands-on manual. And I had a bosun come to me one time and say, "You stokers, all of you think you're the cat's meow, man. Oh, you guys, I could do your job." I said, "Listen, buddy, you could be replaced with a fire axe. Why don't you come down to the boiler room and we'll see if you could do my job?" Because it was completely worlds apart. And I was having fun with him because he was a nice kid, but he was the guy I gave the left-handed hammer to. That was a lot of fun. He came in the shop one day, and on a ship, the left is left is red, green is right.
Oh, okay. I was going to say port side. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Well, for the civilian crowd, port is to the left, and the way to remember it is I left my girl back in port. That way, you never forget which is which. Anyway, I had a green-handled hammer in my hand, and he walked into the shop. And he said, "Leading Seaman Vandergrat?" I said, "Yes," because he was just an ordinary seaman. And he said, "Would you happen to have a hammer I can borrow? I'm working up on the forecastle." And I looked at the one in my hand and I said, "Well, I can give you this one, but you notice the handle's green. That means you can only use it on the starboard side. So if you need to move over across the middle of the ship to the port side, come back and ask me for the
red-handled
hammer."
Yeah,
the red-handled hammer, which I happen to have in my toolbox. Which it was just a fluke. They just happened to be red and green. And my chief ERA was the guy who I'm responsible to. He's the head stoker on board. He's working on something in a vise behind me, and he's not looking. So I give the kid the hammer. He goes off and he turns at me and he goes, Vandergraat, you can be such a jerk sometime. And he started to laugh. His shoulders are bouncing. Well, about 45 minutes later, this kid comes back into the shop and he's mad as a wet hen. He said, you lied to me. You lied to me. I said, I did not. He said, I moved over to the other side of the ship and nobody said a thing. I said, you got lucky. You didn't get caught.
You're just terrible.
Oh, man, I'm telling you, the stories. Oh, God, I could
So-
spend hours.
Seriously, I mean, when you think back to, Paul Harvey,
Yep.
you heard those clips on the radio. And then in more modern days, you've got Mike Rowe, who did a show called Dirty Jobs on Discovery Network.
Yes,
Started
yes.
a great podcast called The Way I Heard It. And
Right.
and unabashedly, in fact, Paul Harvey's son wrote him a letter saying, what a great tribute to my father, way to carry on this storytelling tradition. And very much the same way that Paul Harvey did it, tells the story and doesn't really reveal who this well-known person is until the end. That would be an amazing podcast to do, Nick. I don't know if there's anything like that out there, but just with your military history, with your sense of humor, that's these are great stories. They're compelling, and I've watched the audience sit very, very quietly, and yet very engaged in what you're saying. I think there's something to that.
Well, let me tell you a story, a personal story that I was actually involved in 1980. I'm going to say 83. It was the year we were in Amsterdam, so it's 83 or 84. We were on a cruise called Eastland, which is a major NATO exercise, and there were like 5,000 sailors, 250 ships, and we were part of it. And our job, I was on HMCS Saguenay at the time, was to keep the Russians, because it's international waters. They are allowed to go wherever they want to go. You
Mhm.
can't say anything to them.
Mhm.
And what they would try and do is get in front of Eisenhower and either force the ship to hit them or to turn out of the wind. Well, when you've got multi-million-dollar airplanes in the air running on fumes and counting on that flight deck to be pointed into the wind so they can land, you can't afford to turn. So our job was to keep the Russians from doing it. So for 3 days, we would go screaming across the water when one of these Russians, there was a Krivak and a Kreshin, one's a cruiser, one's a destroyer. We'd go screaming across the water and stop in front of them the way they were going to do in front of the Eisenhower, and they would turn away. The other one would make a run, so we spin around. So we're going from full power to stop, over and over again for 3 days. Now there's a piece of kit in the boiler room that feeds combustion air to the boilers. They're called the turbo blowers. And they call them turbo blowers because they're run by steam, and they're great big fans about the size of the fan you see on the front of a 747 engine.
Okay.
And that moves hundreds of thousands of cubic feet of air into the boiler. So there's plenty of air for combustion for the fires.
Right.
All right. So when you have all the fires on, you're burning 250,000 pounds of fuel an hour with one boiler. When you combine the other one, you're at that's 125, 250 for the both. So you need a lot of air. And we're racing over, and I'm reading about a piece of safety equipment on these things called the overspeed trip. And these things have a very particular whine. And the guy running the boiler happened to look through his smoke mirrors to see how much smoke he's making, because when you're burning fossil fuel at sea at that kind of power, you're going to have what they call an economical haze. And he's trying to get to that. Well, the tack on that particular piece of equipment was out by about 1,500 RPM, but he didn't know it. So he gave her just a little more steam, and it tripped it out. So now there's this long, slow wind down of the sound of this turbine, and everything goes surreal. Because now the boiler isn't getting enough air, but there's too much fire to just go out. It's got to get it from somewhere. So the boiler sits in a stainless steel casing. And as the air is used up in the combustion chamber, the casing collapses because now the pressure in the boiler room is greater than the pressure in the boiler. So that casing collapses, then it springs back because it sucks it back down the funnel. Only it doesn't do it nice and slow like I just described it. It goes because that's how fast it's burning. Eisenhower thought we were on fire. We put out so much smoke. They put 4 Sea Kings over us, thinking they were bringing firefighting gear, thought we were on. No, we
Right.
reset the trip, and within 5 minutes, we were up and running again because we have procedures for when that kind of thing happens. But the long-term result of that was that the Eisenhower went out and basically told the Russians to bugger off. They put 4 Tomcats up. They were flying the F-14s at that time. And these 4 Tomcats, usually what they'll do is they'll disappear out 25, 30, 40, 50 miles out on what they call a combat air patrol, and we never see them. We see them come into land, and we were so close to Eisenhower at times, you could have thrown an orange from our bridge up onto their flight deck. We could read the names without binoculars on the side of the airplanes. That's how close we were.
Wow.
But in this instance, he put those Tomcats up. They went over the ships. They dropped all their fuel on top of those 2 Russian destroyers, hit the afterburners, took off, went out and landed again because now they're out of gas. But that was the end of that. It was a remarkable story. And it was all because our captain was not going to be beat by a couple of Russian destroyers. He simply refused, said there's no way they're going to get in front of that ship if I have anything to say about it. And it's a tremendous story. I actually wrote a poem about it somewhere. It's on Facebook somewhere. Yeah. It's called, it's called Chicken at Sea. And that's pretty much what we played.
Well, and here we are, speaking of Russia, things are getting scary there again. I know we've only got a couple minutes left, but in a nutshell, Lowell asked the question today, so I'll pass it on to you. What would you be doing right now with all the smack talk coming out of Moscow? What would you be doing? Do you get at the ready? Do you believe any of this?
When Putin
make some sense of it.
The thing I'm afraid of is Putin's feeling desperate.
Right.
And a desperate man is a very hard thing to predict. Look at Hitler during World War II. I'm not saying Putin's Hitler, but I'm saying that when people get desperate, they do incredibly what would otherwise be crazy things. So
I said that today. If Putin thinks he's on his way out, if we're coming to get him, and he's going to die anyway, why not make history?
What's holding them back? Exactly. And so I would probably go to Israel, and I would get the Iron Dome defense. They have like a 90% success rate at shooting down incoming missiles from different places around them, because everybody knows how much Israel's loved in the Middle East. And I would put that in the Ukraine and other countries around them. How fast that could be done, I don't know. I don't know the logistical chain of that.
How large are they? How big a piece of machinery are we talking about?
They're large. They sit on trucks and they come up on an angle like that.
Okay.
And they're fired up.
They're large, but they're portable. We're not talking.
Yeah, they're truck mounted.
Okay.
At least I think they are. But you have to do something. You have to let. See again. If things were different, this never would have happened, because Putin would have known that. Let's say Trump, if he says you go in there, I'm going to nuke Moscow, then this never would have happened. But we have a weak leadership in the United States, who are the ones everybody looks to for leadership, especially in a case like this. And who knows what's going to happen. I would certainly, if I were suddenly thrust into a position of power right now, I would be going to the Israelis and say, okay, how do we defend against this? Because we don't trust this maniac not to do it.
Scary times.
Yes, it is, and he's
right.
I
appreciate you breaking that down for us to make some common sense of it, because I don't understand anything about this other than threats are being made. And look, I think Trump is a lunatic. Politics aside, I see what he's doing. I get the game. I don't like the brashness of it. It doesn't sit well with me. It's loud. It's abrasive. But you're absolutely right. A man like him in the White House is unpredictable, and that keeps someone like Putin honest.
This is what you've got the same thing with Putin right now, don't you?
Yep.
So 2 unpredictable people are much easier to control than one unpredictable person dealing with the sane person. Although I would say that Biden might not fit that second category all that well. All right. Listen, I want to say thank you very much, John. It's been a pleasure. I've loved telling the stories. I love the conversation.
Yeah,
And,
that was certainly different for this show. And
Yeah.
on behalf of the listeners, because I consider myself, when you're telling stories like that, to be one of the listeners, and really appreciated that. I honestly, please give consideration to making that into a podcast. It's very compelling.
I will. I'll have to dig out some books and dig up some stories again. There's
Cool.
no shortage of them, that's for sure. I used to have a catalog of all the scripts, but it got lost in the shuffle somewhere along the way because I would love to redo them. So who knows? I will give that some thought.
Good.
Because I love telling those stories. It's part of what makes it. People should be proud to be Canadian listening to these stories because they're all true.
And they're not being told. And,
No,
like
they're not.
you said, why are we not making movies about it? I don't know, because it's not,
Well, Hollywood doesn't
it's
have.
not happening
has no
it's not
interest.
happening in the prairies in the 1800s. It just doesn't suit
Well,
CBC. I don't know.
They did do that series
Well, all right.
at Netflix called Frontier, which is all about Canada. So
More
who
of
knows?
it.
Anyway,
Get off my
thank
radio
you,
station, Nick. Good night.
you have a great night. We'll see you all again when you're older. In the meantime, ubi caritas et amor, Dea sibi est. Good evening, God bless. Don't let anything disturb your peace, and may you have fair wind and a following sea.